He slammed his fist down so hard, the entire table shook and my spoon clattered onto the floor. "You selfish little brat!" he barked, his face red with rage. "He's your brother!" Mom gasped but didn't say a word. My brother just stared at me like I owed him something, as if my refusal to pay off his massive gambling debt was some kind of betrayal. I had barely gotten a word out before I became the villain in my own family. Hi there, and welcome to HD Reddit Stories. Have you ever been made to feel like the bad guy just because you set a boundary? Especially when it's someone you love? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if these kinds of family stories hit home, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. We've got plenty more where this came from. I didn't think saying no would detonate the room like that. But maybe I should have. I had always been the reliable one, the fixer, the helper, the quiet backbone of the family who never asked for anything. So when my dad leaned forward that night and said, "Your brother's made some mistakes, but he's family," I knew what was coming. And still, I tried to believe he was just venting. That he wouldn't actually ask me to clean up a mess I didn't make. But then he did. He asked me to pay off over $15,000 of gambling debt. Not a loan. Not a temporary favor. A full-on bailout. No apology from my brother. No repayment plan. Just a sigh, a shrug, and two expectant faces staring back at me like this was the obvious, decent thing to do. When I said, "No," it was like I set off a bomb. My dad exploded. My mom looked away. My brother had the audacity to look hurt. Hurt. As if he was the one being betrayed. My chest burned with a mix of shame and fury. How had we come to this? How had I become the enemy just for protecting what I'd worked so hard to rebuild? I wasn't rich. I wasn't cold. I just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep sacrificing my peace so others could avoid consequences. And as I sat there, blinking back the sting in my eyes, I realized something awful. They didn't ask me because they believed in me. They asked me because they expected me to give up everything, without a second thought. Because to them, my sacrifice was a given. It didn't start that night at the dinner table. That was just when the mask finally slipped all the way off. But looking back, I can trace the cracks, the quiet signs that things were never as fair, never as balanced as I tried so hard to believe. My brother, Ryan, was always the golden child, charming, funny, reckless in a way that was somehow excused as being just a phase. Every mistake he made was softened with a chuckle or dismissed with a wave of Dad's hand. He was a boy being a boy. Meanwhile, I was the mature one, the responsible one, the one who knew better. And for years I clung to that label like it was something to be proud of. I thought that being the one who never caused problems meant I'd earned respect. But all it meant was that I was the one expected to clean up every mess. When I was 10, Ryan broke Mom's favorite lamp by playing football inside the house. I remember Dad storming into the room, demanding to know what happened. I said it was both of us, even though it wasn't. I thought I was protecting him. Dad grounded me for a week. Ryan got ice cream that night. It should have been a red flag. But I told myself, "You're older. That's just how it goes." Even though I was only 13 months older. When I got my first job at 16, I saved half my paycheck to help Mom with groceries. Ryan used his to buy sneakers and game credits. When I asked him once if he'd consider chipping in, he laughed and said, "That's your thing. You like being the helper." I didn't say anything. I told myself he'd grow out of it. That he'd step up eventually. But he never did. And no one expected him to. The bar for him was so low it was practically underground. I moved out at 18. Not because I wanted to escape, at least that's what I told myself, but because I wanted to start something of my own. I worked 2 jobs and went to school at night. I skipped vacations, skipped nights out, skipped sleep just to stay afloat. But I was proud. I never asked for help. I never wanted to be a burden. Meanwhile, Ryan bounced between community college and figuring things out. which usually meant couch surfing and trying to launch get-rich-quick schemes that always fell apart. And each time he failed, there was a safety net, Mom and Dad, ready with money, a place to stay, or just silence. I remember coming home for Thanksgiving one year, a few months after being laid off. I didn't even mention it, didn't want to bring the mood down. But somehow Ryan found out. I think he overheard a voicemail from a recruiter I hadn't called back yet. That night, he said at the table, "Tough break, huh? Guess it's not so easy being the perfect one." Dad chuckled. Mom said nothing. And I sat there, choking on turkey, wondering why I felt like a failure for something that wasn't even my fault. That's when I started to realize, being responsible didn't make me safe. It just made me invisible. The night he asked me to pay off Ryan's gambling debt, everything boiled over. But it had been building for years. Every birthday where Ryan's gift was more thoughtful. Every holiday where I showed up and he didn't, yet the seat at the table was always saved for him. Every crisis I handled quietly while his were broadcast like tragic hero stories. It was exhausting. It was lonely. And worst of all, it was expected. After that dinner, I didn't speak to them for weeks. I couldn't. I was too angry, too hurt. But eventually, Mom reached out. She texted, "Your father didn't mean to yell. He's just stressed. We're all worried about Ryan." I stared at the screen for 10 minutes before closing it. Not a single word about how I felt. Not even a question. Just more concern for Ryan. It was always about Ryan. I tried to reason with myself. I thought maybe they were raised to believe this kind of loyalty was love. Maybe they didn't realize the damage it was doing. But the truth was, they did know. At least on some level. Because when I finally told my mom how hurt I was, how unfair everything had felt for years, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "I'm sorry you feel that way." Not, "I'm sorry we made you feel that way." Just, like it was my problem. And maybe that's when it truly broke. Not the shouting or the silence, but the moment I realized they weren't willing to even see me. All they saw was the role I played, the fixer, the reliable one, the ATM, the peacekeeper. Not a person with limits. Not someone who deserved care. Just someone who never complained, and therefore, someone who could always be asked for more. I started journaling around then. Just little thoughts, bits of things I'd never dared say out loud. Would they still love me if I stopped showing up? If I failed, would they come running the way they do for him? The answers weren't comforting. But they were honest. I knew what I had to do. I had to stop bleeding for people who wouldn't even notice I was hurt. I had to stop giving just because I could. I had to choose me, for once. One day, Ryan called. I hadn't spoken to him since the dinner. He opened with a joke, like nothing had happened. Then, after a few minutes of fake catching up, he said, "So, did you think more about the money thing?" I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how unsurprised I was. He didn't even ask how I was. Didn't acknowledge the fallout. Just assumed I'd come around. I said, "No. And I won't." He paused. Wow. Cold. Then he hung up. I expected to feel guilty. But I didn't. I felt clear. After that, it got quiet. No texts. No calls. Birthdays passed. Holidays came and went. The silence was thick, but also peaceful. I missed the idea of family. But not the version I had. Not the kind where love was conditional on compliance. One evening, I got a letter in the mail from my dad. It was short. Handwritten. He said, "Families help each other. I don't understand you anymore." I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer I never opened again. Because he was right, we didn't understand each other. I had spent my whole life trying to be worthy of a family that never tried to be worthy of me. I don't hate them. I don't wish them harm. But I stopped waiting for them to change. I stopped setting myself on fire to keep them warm. And in doing that, I realized something. Walking away isn't weakness. Sometimes, it's the bravest thing you can do. Especially when the people who raised you are the ones holding the matches. That's when the guilt began to fade. When I realized I wasn't selfish, I was surviving. I wasn't cold, I was tired. I wasn't cruel, I was finally done being the only one trying. And I hadn't even started fighting back yet. I don't know exactly when the plan formed in my head. Maybe it wasn't even a plan at first, just a quiet vow that I would never, ever be put in that position again. A vow that I wouldn't let guilt or obligation ruin what little peace I'd built for myself. That I would no longer participate in the unspoken family contract where Ryan got bailed out, and I got bled dry. And so I started watching. Listening. Not out of revenge, but for clarity. And what I saw, once I stopped trying to excuse it, was astonishing. Ryan wasn't just bad with money. He was reckless, entitled, and utterly insulated by my parents' blind loyalty. He would take out payday loans, buy expensive clothes, gamble on sports apps, and then magically find reasons why someone else should cover the fallout. I'd heard through a cousin that he was borrowing money under my father's name, co-signing leases, and not paying a cent. There were quiet murmurs that he'd already been sued once, but my dad took care of it. That was my family's pattern: deny, cover, repeat. And for once I let them. I let them spin their web, while I built mine. I moved my savings into a separate account under a new LLC. It was something I'd been meaning to do anyway for tax reasons, but now it served a double purpose: privacy. I got legal advice on how to protect myself from family liability. I checked my credit reports and froze them temporarily to block unauthorized inquiries. And then, for the first time ever, I made a list of every financial favor I'd done for my family in the past 10 years. It shocked even me. Thousands of dollars in emergencies. Rent payments I was told would be reimbursed. Car repairs, utility bills, even co-signed documents I forgot I'd signed. Then came the final straw. I received a notice from a debt collector. Apparently, Ryan had listed me as a backup payer for a $7,000 casino credit line. I never signed anything. My signature was forged. I was livid, but not surprised. That was when I knew they hadn't just asked me to sacrifice. They were already doing it behind my back. So I hired a lawyer. Not to sue. Not yet. But to set boundaries, legally and indisputably. We sent cease and desist letters to the debt agencies, challenging the forged documents. We started the process of legally severing any shared financial obligations tied to my parents' names. I opened a secure P.O. box and removed them as emergency contacts on all records. I made it clear I was no longer accessible for their financial disasters. When the calls came, first from Ryan, then from Dad, I didn't answer. I wanted everything in writing. Predictably, the emails were full of outrage. What happened to you? You're abandoning your family? After all we've done? And then the clincher from my dad. You think a lawyer is going to protect you from us? That was the moment I felt something break, but not inside me, inside them. The illusion that I could be bullied forever. That I'd always cave. That I'd rather be accepted than respected. That version of me was gone. I finally responded with a short, polite email. Any future communication must go through my legal representative. I wish you all the best. 2 days later, Ryan showed up at my apartment unannounced. He banged on the door for 10 minutes yelling. I didn't answer. I called the police and reported it. A week later, I filed for a restraining order, not because I was scared of him, but because I wanted to establish a paper trail. I was done playing nice. Then, Karma arrived wearing a suit. My dad had co-signed a private business loan with Ryan the year before. I hadn't known about it, none of us had. It was for a marketing startup that never got off the ground. Ryan had defaulted on the loan. The creditor came after both of them. I found out when a mutual friend forwarded me a court filing. My dad was being sued for over $60,000. And you know what? For once, I did nothing. I didn't call. I didn't offer help. I didn't even gloat. I just watched as the house of cards collapsed. They tried calling again. Even Mom, who rarely intervened, emailed me something desperate and vague. "Please! It's bad. He needs your support. We're drowning." But I didn't respond. I was still the same person. Still kind. Still measured. But I wasn't their safety net anymore. I wasn't the reliable one they could use as a spare parachute. 3 months later, I got a letter from their lawyer, an attempt at mediation. They wanted to rebuild trust. Translation: they wanted money. My response, via my attorney, was surgical. My client has no further obligation, legal or emotional, to resolve debts or repair consequences resulting from the actions of Mr. Ryan, last name, or Mr. Father's full name. Any suggestion otherwise will be treated as harassment. It was glorious. That winter, I heard from extended family that my parents had to sell their second car and were considering downsizing. Ryan had moved in with a friend and was allegedly working minimum wage. And while I didn't celebrate their suffering, I also didn't feel responsible for it. For the first time in my life, I had stepped completely out of the system. And I was free. I took a solo trip to the mountains. It wasn't extravagant, just peaceful. I spent the mornings hiking, the afternoons journaling, and the evenings watching the sky change color. One night, as I stood on a quiet overlook, I realized I hadn't thought about them all day. Not once. And it felt like breathing for the first time. But the final twist came later, months after everything settled. I got a notice from a financial compliance agency. Apparently, Ryan had tried to file a complaint against me, claiming I had committed fraud by withholding support he was entitled to. That was his actual claim. Entitled. As if my earnings were community property in our family unit. I forwarded it to my lawyer, who responded with a detailed account of the forged signature on the casino credit and the restraining order. The case was dismissed immediately. But I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. He had tried to take me down, and ended up strengthening my paper trail. After that, everything went silent. No more calls. No more emails. It was like they finally accepted the truth. Or maybe they just ran out of moves. Either way, I had my life back. And it was better than I imagined. I got a new apartment. Promoted to a better position. Started therapy. Built real friendships not based on what I could provide, but who I actually was. I even started dating again, not in search of someone to fix, but someone who'd see me clearly. Someone who wouldn't expect me to carry their world on my shoulders. Sometimes I think about that night, Dad's hands slamming the table, his voice full of rage, Mom's silence, Ryan's smirk. And then I think about the last time I saw my own face in the mirror and felt proud. Proud for walking away. Proud for refusing to sacrifice my soul in the name of family. They didn't just want my help. They expected my sacrifice. And when I refused, they finally realized I was never theirs to control. It's been a year now. 12 full months since that dinner table explosion, since the yelling, the guilt, the accusations. 12 months since I decided not just to walk away, but to stay away. And in that time, everything has changed, even if they never wanted it to. Ryan still lives with his friend. Or at least, that's what I've been told. I haven't seen him. He hasn't tried to contact me again, not since the financial agency shut down his ridiculous claim. But every once in a while, I get a message from someone on the fringe of the family, an aunt, a cousin, asking if there's any chance I'll come home for the holidays, if we might ever be a family again. They mean well. But they don't know what it costs me to finally put myself first. My parents sold the house 2 months after the loan default case was finalized. It was subtle at first, an off-market transfer, quiet whispers among relatives. But I noticed when the address changed on the return label of a card my mother sent. A smaller place now. Farther out of town. No more 2-car garage, no more cozy fireplace. Just what they could manage on dwindling pensions and a son who never followed through. I held that envelope in my hand for a long time before I opened it. The handwriting on the front was still the same. Slanted and neat, familiar in a way that made something twist in my chest. Inside, just a short message from my mom. I miss our talks. Hope you're okay. Love, Mom. No apologies. No acknowledgements. Just nostalgia wrapped in guilt. I didn't respond. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I was done participating in one-sided relationships. I didn't want her to suffer. I didn't want any of them to. I just wanted them to understand, finally, what I had lived through for decades, what it felt like to be forgotten. That's the thing people rarely talk about when they say, family is everything. They don't mention that family can drain you. That sometimes, the ones closest to you are the first to cross every boundary. That love without respect is just control dressed in soft language. I had spent most of my life being the buffer between Ryan's chaos and my parents' blind loyalty. I thought that if I was good enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, they'd see me. They'd care. They'd protect me, just once. But when I needed them to choose integrity over convenience, they chose him. Again and again. So no, I didn't go back. Not for birthdays. Not for holidays. Not even when my mother ended up in the hospital for a minor procedure that my cousin said was nothing serious, but she's asking for you. I sent flowers. Paid the bill quietly, because that's still who I am at the core. But I didn't show up. I couldn't. Because showing up would have meant stepping back into that role. The one where I'm only good when I'm giving. I didn't burn bridges. I just stopped rebuilding ones they kept trampling. Instead, I started new traditions. I hosted my own holiday dinners, small and quiet, with friends who had become like family. People who never expected anything from me beyond my presence. I laughed more. I slept better. The nightmares faded. The sense of obligation stopped clinging to my skin like a second layer. Sometimes I wonder if they sit in their smaller house now and think about what happened. If my dad ever admits to himself that he crossed a line he can't uncross. If my mom regrets the silence more than the shouting. If Ryan feels anything at all. But I don't let those thoughts linger long. I've learned to let go of answers I'll never get. One evening, just a few weeks ago, I was walking home from work when I saw a car parked outside my building. An older model sedan, the kind my dad used to drive. For a second, my chest tightened. But it wasn't them. Just someone waiting for a rideshare. Still, I stood there longer than I needed to, staring at the reflection of streetlights on the windshield. And I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of confrontation. Not of guilt. Not of being called selfish. I had faced the worst of it, and walked out whole. I had redefined what love looked like. What home meant. What I was willing to tolerate, and what I would never allow again. They say forgiveness is freeing. And maybe it is. But I don't think what I found was forgiveness, not in the traditional sense. What I found was release. A soft, steady kind of peace that didn't require me to forget what happened. Only to stop carrying it like armor. Sometimes that's all healing is. My last memory of my father is him slamming his hand on the table, red-faced and furious, calling me a disgrace. But maybe one day, I'll remember him differently. Maybe not. But either way, that memory doesn't define me anymore. I'm not the child who needed their approval. I'm not the sibling desperate to be acknowledged. I'm just me. Whole. Independent. Enough. And that is the most unexpected ending of all, not vengeance, not tragedy, but quiet strength. They lost the version of me who would have died proving I was worthy. And I gained the version who never needed to. If you had asked me a few years ago what it meant to be a good person, I would have said something like, show up. Help when you can. Put family first. Don't complain. That was the story I told myself for most of my life. That goodness was measured by sacrifice, that love meant never saying no, and that being the reliable one would earn me love in return. But life has a strange way of teaching you the lessons you didn't know you needed. And sometimes, the people closest to you are the ones who push you to finally learn them. What I've come to understand is that boundaries are not betrayals. Saying no doesn't mean you don't care. It means you finally care enough about yourself to stop bleeding for people who won't stop cutting. I used to think it was noble to carry everyone else's weight. That being the strong one meant absorbing pain without letting it show. But all it really did was teach the people around me that I didn't need support. That I was built for endurance. That they could take, and I would just keep standing. But we all have limits. And it's not weakness to recognize them. It's wisdom. I used to feel ashamed for needing space. Ashamed for not picking up the phone. Ashamed for not rushing to fix problems I didn't create. But that shame wasn't mine to carry. It was the residue of a family system that praised silence and punished self-respect. A system where love was given to the loudest crisis, not the quietest effort. And walking away from that was the hardest thing I've ever done, not because I didn't love them, but because I had to love myself more. The truth is, some families teach you how to survive, but not how to live. They show you how to endure, but not how to be seen. And it's easy to believe that if you're the responsible one, the peacemaker, the fixer, you'll be valued for it. But more often than not, those roles become invisible. Expected. Taken for granted. You become the background music to someone else's chaos. And when you finally stop playing, they don't miss the melody. They just get angry that it's quiet. I spent years thinking love was something you earned by being useful. But love, real love, doesn't come with a debt attached. It doesn't require you to destroy yourself for someone else's comfort. It doesn't demand your silence in exchange for belonging. The hardest part wasn't the silence that followed my decision. It was unlearning the idea that my worth was tied to what I gave. That I had to prove, constantly, that I deserved space in the family. But I did deserve space. I deserved respect. I deserved to be heard even when I said no. And so do you. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own home, like your boundaries were seen as betrayal, like your needs were too inconvenient to matter, I want you to know something. You are not wrong for protecting your peace. You are not cruel for stepping away. You are not selfish for wanting something more than survival. It's okay to grieve what could have been. It's okay to miss the version of your family you wish you had. But don't let that grief keep you tied to a cycle that erodes you. Sometimes, love looks like distance. Sometimes, healing looks like silence. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is let go of people who only love the version of you that bends. Forgiveness doesn't always come in a conversation. Sometimes it comes in a deep breath, a quiet evening alone, a life rebuilt on your own terms. And peace? Peace is when you no longer flinch at the sound of their name. When you no longer rehearse what you wish you had said. When your world no longer revolves around being understood by people who refuse to see you. I don't know if my family will ever change. I don't know if they'll ever apologize, or even acknowledge what happened. But I've stopped waiting for that. I don't need their permission to heal. I don't need their approval to grow. And I don't need to shrink just to keep the illusion of harmony. What I need, and what I've finally given myself, is freedom. Freedom from being the fixer. Freedom from guilt that wasn't mine. Freedom to choose who I let into my heart and my home. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by behavior. By presence. By reciprocity. And while I may have walked away from the one I was born into, I've begun building one that sees me, values me, and doesn't ask me to erase myself to stay loved. If you're reading this and it feels familiar, if you've been made to feel like too much or not enough by the very people who are supposed to protect you, know that you are not alone. And you are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to choose peace over obligation. You are allowed to rewrite your story. Because the most powerful thing I've learned is this. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. You are allowed to be whole. You are allowed to be free. And you are allowed to say, this is where it ends. And that ending? It's not a failure. It's a beginning.